Good thing I noticed. Okay, my guest today is Mike Barbera, an old friend of mine I've known for a long time, of Real Living Barbera Associates. So I want to even just off the get-go dig into what that means in the business. But let's just start with tell us what it is you guys do. What is the business?
Sure. We're a real estate brokerage with our primary office in Worcester. We also have an office in Cambridge, Massachusetts, just outside of Boston that we opened going on 3 years.
No kidding.
Yeah. So we do about 80% of our business right now, 80 to 85% is in the residential space, with the balance of it being in commercial sales and leasing.
So are you in between all the different offices, or do you kind of work out of one location?
Yeah, I spread myself between the two. The way that most real estate brokerages are structured is it's a collection of independent contractors, and our contractors, our agents, live throughout the state. So even though we've got the 2 brick and mortar locations, most of our agents work primarily from what I would call semi-remotely to remotely.
Sure.
So I do spend the majority of my time, I live in Worcester. So I come into the Worcester office frequently, and I get out to Cambridge pretty frequently as well.
But in essence, they're sprinkled all around, and they're in the office if they need to be. That's why they're there as like a home base if they need somewhere to go, but they're mostly out on the road or at home.
Exactly. It's transitioned to that. It used to be 15 years ago, even 20 years ago, the majority of agents would come in the majority of days, and that's not the case anymore.
What would they be doing the majority of days in an office?
So in the office, primary responsibilities or activities would be along the line of prospecting, generating new business, and of course servicing too. A lot of what we do is outside of the client-facing portion of the real estate transaction.
Like what?
So we, of course, what the client would see was the times that we'll be at showings and inspections, but all of the servicing components, contracting, or generating contracts, negotiating, I'd say probably 70% of the real estate transaction takes place outside of the face-to-face client interaction.
Mm. And it's always been a bit of a mystery, your industry, to me. I mean, it's one that everyone uses and everyone is familiar at the surface level with, the seeing the house, the buying the house. But I'm getting way ahead of myself, and we'll go back. But in your business, how do you differentiate? How do you be different than the real estate agent next door? Because it seems like there's so many of you guys, but not everyone's good at it, and it doesn't work for everyone. How do you, maybe we'll back up and answer the question this way. You're under Real Living, which is a franchise, right?
That's accurate, yep.
But then it's Barbera Associates, and that's the family business that I think your dad started, and then you've now taken over.
Correct.
So how, we'll just start there. Mm-hmm. How much of the franchise governs what you do and how you behave and how you act, and how much of it's the family or the small business, and how do they interact? And, I'm interested in how that business, what does that do for you, the franchise, and
Sure.
What do you do for it?
Sure. I would say that broadly speaking, real estate franchises are less controlling of the day-to-day business than the franchise model might be in other sectors. For example, when you think of some of the biggest franchises like a Subway, their business systems are pretty rigid, is my understanding. Supplies and things come from the franchise. I would put real estate franchises on the other end of that spectrum, where in our case specifically with Real Living, the franchise exists for support, and they generate a lot of our technology and also for guidance. But we run our business pretty closely to how you may run an independently run brokerage.
That's what I was wondering. Yeah. They primarily get involved or help out with like your website and different probably platforms or technology or MLS and all that sort of stuff, right? Is that
exactly accurate? So that's one of the primary benefits is the just economy and scale and the ability to invest more resources in sort of the technological things that we as franchisees or as broker owners can use. And then also the networking component, our particular franchise, and of course being a bit biased, but our network, the other
be biased, though. That's the whole point of having a business, right?
Right, you should be, I suppose. The network, the other folks that are involved in the Real Living companies, I've found to be just a tremendous wealth of information and really one of the greatest resources.
So then that's really cool, and that probably helps a lot to have that behind you. But then what about your business? It comes from the Barberas. What's the twist on it? Is there one? Is there, and,
Sure.
And what is that?
Sure, that's a great question. So the differentiator, I guess, is what we're driving at. And you touched upon probably the most important component of that. There are 65,000 real estate licensees in the state of Massachusetts. It's a lot of people who hold the legal right to act in the capacity of a real estate agent. Of those 65,000, it's a minuscule fraction that practice regularly. And of those who practice regularly, it's an even smaller fraction who complete a sufficient amount of transactions over the course of their career to get good transactional experience. So there's major differentiation from someone who holds a real estate license and someone who deals with real estate brokerage truly as their profession. And then within that, there's even subquartiles that it really drills down to a small number of folks doing the majority of the transactions out there.
Yeah, and I imagine that's an unfortunate thing you have to come across and constantly defend. It's not unique to your industry, but it's probably a bigger problem in your industry, kind of like it is in mine, in marketing or in like personal training, where, you know, out of every 500 personal trainers you meet, probably one knows what they're doing. And maybe that number's too aggressive, but you know what I'm talking about.
That sentiment is absolutely accurate, and it's a major problem. We've got a major PR problem in the optics of our industry. I think that we're sometimes lumped with the likeness of used car salesman.
Sure.
Nothing against used car salesmen. I'm sure there's wonderful used car salesmen as well, but
more the reputation that precedes the used car salesman.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when we're sometimes meeting a client for the first time, they're counting, not sometimes, anytime we're meeting a client for the first time, they're counting upon the experiences they've had with real estate agents in the past, and they've not all been favorable. It is a very, very low barrier to entry.
Yeah.
It's very inexpensive to become a real estate agent. It's very easy to become a real estate agent. It's about 40 hours of pre-licensure class that you need to take, and you need to pass a test, and now you're supposedly equipped to go out and help people with the most important transactions in their life, and it's inadequate training. So what I try to do here at Real Living Barbera Associates is make sure that we're hiring only the best, only the most motivated, only the most ethical real estate agents, and making sure that they're trained with the right resources to be the top tier professional agents in the areas that we serve.
So how do you go about trying to do that? Where if you're trying to hire the best and train the best, is it mostly the training and the way that you handle the customer relationship? In other words, if we drive down the street here, there's going to be 5 other real estate companies, right? And how do you recruit as opposed to that same salesperson going there, coming over here? What is it that's different under the Barbera shingle?
Sure. So it starts with the selection process. So we're very selective in who we invite to work here. We're a company with 2 offices and 30 agents. There are individual offices that have over 200 or 300 agents operating in the state. So we our size is deliberate, and it allows for direct oversight, and not oversight so much as support for our agent base. So it's vitally essential to me to make sure that we attract the most committed and capable agents that are out there, and then help them to bring their businesses to the next level.
So I want to go back, like I said, now thinking about the business. And your dad founded it, right? Your dad started it?
Right. So he, prior to the affiliation with the franchise, my father was he was a teacher. Both parents were actually teachers, and my father had some investments in real estate. Earlier in life, he had a couple properties, student rental housing properties, maintained a real estate brokerage license since the 70s, but never actually actively sold. Then around 1997 began an independent real estate brokerage, Barbera Associates Real Estate. Ran that through 2007, 2008, when the market, as we are all aware, tanked, for lack of a better term. At that time, he transitioned into a property management company, began a property management company. I had been licensed since 2002. I got licensed.
Before you go on, property management, you mean like, so when everything crashed and tanked, he couldn't sell as many houses, so he was getting more into managing the ones that were around or were under the control, try to like service the ones you have as opposed to trying to find new ones?
Yeah, generally speaking, real estate brokerage was, of course, very difficult when the volume of transactions and the average sale price reduced. It made it very difficult, and it happened very quickly, as many of us know. So he was looking at other opportunities, other ways to generate revenue with his skill set. Didn't want to go back to teaching. So he partnered with a friend of his who was acquiring some properties and built up a sort of a boutique property management company that caters to primarily student rentals.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
What what made him go from teacher to real estate agent? What was the catalyst for that?
It's tough, always tough to speak for someone else, but
you can speak roughly. I just want to
Sure.
get in from there to you taking over. So I'm just want to kind of understand how the shingle got hung by the street,
Sure.
to begin with.
So I think teaching is a grind. He taught special education, and my mother was also involved in special
My wife
education.
teaches special education.
Yeah, it's a tremendous gratification that they've both received from it, and I know they've impacted positively a lot of lives. But my father was in the public school system, and from what I gather, it was taxing to some extent, and the teachers
No doubt.
burnt out
No
after
doubt.
a period of time, and he'd always had an interest in real estate. He was involved earlier in his life in a family real estate company, actually, again owning student rentals. So he had a great knowledge base, and it was a good transition out of the teaching gig.
And what did that? So at the time when the economy went boom, were you already working with the company? Were you already
Yes.
an agent here? So what did you do before that, or did you always kind of know that was your path because you saw your dad doing it? And
Yeah, I had some exposure. So in 2002 is when I got licensed. It was my senior year of high school, and I had, of course, some exposure to the industry, and it was something that interested me. Got my license, basically dabbled a little bit throughout my college years. I attended college out of state, and then upon graduating in 2006, I worked a little bit on the property management side, more in the maintenance of some of the properties that we owned. And then 2008 is when I took a more active role in real estate as he was sort of positioning his exit. And that's when I took management, and that's when we joined with the Real Living franchise.
so did you architect the Real Living?
It was actually, I guess that would have coincided with when we sort of diversified, when he went his direction with property management. It was all kind of brought together. It was actually one of our agents, Brian Allen, who's been with our company. Actually, one of the agents has been with us the longest, who identified the franchise, which at that time was a very, very unique franchise in that it was a small, family-owned, privately held franchise. And now it's owned by Berkshire Hathaway, and there's been several iterations of it between then and now. But it's drastically different.
Has it been mucked with since it was taken over by Berkshire? Has anything changed, or the relationship kind of stay the same?
It's been transformative. So it went from a small Ohio-based franchise where we were the only Real Living franchise in Massachusetts for quite some time. Then it was acquired by Brookfield Asset Management, I believe it's a Canadian private equities company, and then acquired more recently by Berkshire Hathaway. There's been all kinds of changes to leadership, but we actually are pleased with the direction that the franchise is going right now.
Well, I mean, it's a winner firm, so hopefully you get some good guidance out of that, right?
You don't wind up with more scale. So the parent company of Real Living is Home Services of America, which is the largest global real estate company by transaction volume. They've got one major competitor in that space. So it's the scale is there, but then on the other end of that coin, Real Living is a relatively small network, because 4,000 agents nationwide, about 400 of which are in Massachusetts. So it's interesting. It's almost like a boutique feel within, of course, under the umbrella of one of the largest global companies that exists.
Yeah. So when that changes, when it changes hands, do you get affected your day to day? Is it like, here we go again, it's going to be a whole bunch of change in management and stuff, or is it mostly maybe a couple technology changes, but they don't break what's already working?
Yeah, I would say over the multiple acquisitions, it would have very little effect on day-to-day business, because
you know how rare that is.
I do recognize that, and I think that's because of my personality. I think that's one of the few things that allows me to even be involved in a real estate franchise, is that I probably wouldn't do well with direct oversight or control by another. Not in my nature to accept too much guidance, I should say. I guess to answer your question, it was a minimal effect. Although this most recent 3 or 4 years ago, we wound up with a new CEO, a gentleman named Alan Dalton, who's a former CEO of realtor.com, and an esteemed businessman, originally from Dorchester, from the Massachusetts area, who's had a transformative effect on the brand and the marketing behind the brand, and it's been a really positive in just about every way.
So in 2007 or 8, when you're taking over and your dad's ready to step aside or retire or move on to the property management, and the economy's tanking, take back there. I want to talk about that. Like as you're getting into it, so it's probably as good a place as any to take the helm, right? Because it's a challenge, I'm sure.
Sure.
So and you had seen it go from the thriving market to the boom, right? And then all of a sudden you were selling at the time, so you were aware of how good it was, and then were you like, holy shit, this is like blowing up, or did you think it was just going to be a bump in the road?
Yeah, it was, when I think back to my age and general maturity and business maturity at that time, and certainly 04, 05, 06, I thought this is the way that it was. I thought, real estate values just increased 10% every single year indefinitely. I say that partially in jest, but
that's the mindset, right?
It really
sometimes
was.
It's helpful to be young when the really bad things happen, because
without question, ample time to recover. And I think what you're alluding to is the fact that now, in retrospect, I wouldn't trade that timeline for any other timeline or any other period in history to essentially launch or relaunch a company. Because I learned and cut my teeth in a time where it was really difficult. I mean, the vast majority of brokerages were going out of business. A lot of the agents
in droves.
in droves. And even the agents a lot of the agents who were successful previously were exiting the industry. So it was a very turbulent time for sure, and interesting to learn the business, the way to approach the business in a climate like that.
How many? How big was the firm when you took over? You said you're about 30 agents now. How big was it at the time?
So I think, I believe at the peak, and frankly, I don't have great records, but I think at the peak we were at 32 or 33 agents, but transaction volume at that time was around $25 million. Prices were a little bit different. That was a little while back. Now we're around the same agent count, but last year we closed out a little over $80 million. So I think that the productivity or the sales per agent have increased significantly since that time.
Do you think that's partly because you had to figure out how to be efficient with the whole crash? You had to figure out how to actually make it work?
Sure. Yeah. Efficiency was absolutely key, vital to keeping your doors open. You had to run lean. You had to provide the same level of service with a lot less compensation.
Yeah, I imagine. Just to get some volume, right? Just to make something happen.
Yeah, exactly. Just to be in the black or close enough to the black where you can continue to exist.
Yeah. Did you bring transition people through that were working here prior to you taking over, and then that stayed here on and continue to be employees? Yeah. What was that like? More like the change in power. What was it? A change in power sounds ominous, but taking over, taking the helm. Was there opposition? Was there bumps in the road just to get used to? Was there, even when you think there wouldn't be, there's always odd little quirks because humans are humans, right? And it's not even a good or bad, but there's always there's emotions, quite frankly. That's what it comes down to. So did you have to deal with a lot of that, or was it?
Yeah, there was. We didn't have too many issues with the transition. The transition was gradual, and I think I presume from the agent side, I don't think that it was there weren't any major policy changes upon transfer. So yeah, it was. I would say minimal. That being said, 12 years later, I think there are only 2 agents still affiliated with the company that were at that time, which in part is
that's got to be pretty normal, though. I mean, it's not an industry where you stay in one place for a long time, right?
Right. Agents
not for super long, unless you own the place.
Right. And they are independent contractors. All agents are independent contractors, so movement between companies is somewhat common. We've been fortunate in that the majority of agents who have joined our company typically stay with our company unless they're exiting the industry. So we've had some that have transitioned to other companies and have done well, and that's we've always understood that that's certainly a part of the game, so to speak. But comparatively, I think that we do a good job in making sure that we strive to be the best place to work for agents, and I think we do a good job of it.
What about? So it seems like you've been connected to the family business since the early part of your career in its different phases, between helping out with the property management or being a broker here before you took over the business. How was the business's impact on your life different before? Even though your dad owned it, there was probably a little bit less riding on you in the beginning, and then as that transitioned, that's what I want to hear a little bit about, how it how is your life affected by owning the business, especially the real estate business in the crash and then taking it out of it? How did that affect your whole life as opposed to, your 9 to 5? Because it's not a 9 to 5. That's the whole point. Right?
No, not even close.
Right. I don't just mean real estate. I mean, when you own the joint, it's not 9 to 5.
You're absolutely correct. I think that applies to all small to medium-sized businesses. The biggest impact was, as I was running the company, particularly at that time, I was also acting in the capacity of an agent, and I have for the vast majority of my career acted in both capacities. The major transition was over the past year and a half. I've stepped back from doing individual sales, so it's changed. It's changed a lot of things. My day-to-day function is just different. In terms of finance, it changes things as well. When you're a lot of smaller real estate brokerage owners sell real estate because, of course, when a commission is earned, if you're the one selling it, you earn the lion's share,
sure.
Or in some cases the entirety. And when you're on the other end of that lever, it's the exact opposite. So
at the point, it really has to be a volume play in order to make
mathematically, you really need
to
replace your production with 4 times that, or somewhere around that area. But
some multiple,
exactly. That's been the biggest transition, is to go from player to coach, I suppose is the best way to say it.
What about your work-life balance, as they call it? Owning a business, and especially you're now married, and you're transitioning into a primarily management role, which I imagine is still not a 9 to 5, but probably more resembling a 9 to 5 than it did in 2009, right?
It's more controllable.
Yeah, it's more controllable. And what was it like trying to come back out of the boom? I want to talk more about that. What was going through your head? Did you think, it's going to always know it's going to work?
Yeah,
you couldn't have, right?
That was my underlying assumption. Somehow, some way, this was going to work, and you try to be as strategic as possible. But that positivity, whether misguided or not, that positivity was a necessity.
It paid off clearly.
It did.
It's sometimes you need that false sense of I can do this to actually be a real. I did it.
You've got to believe it. If you don't believe it, it's not going to happen. That sometimes was more challenging than other times.
But you had to have days or nights when you were like, man, I could just go do something else. I could just go get a job. Like, what am I doing here? This isn't moving fast enough, or it's not paying off, or what if this doesn't get better fast enough? You have to weigh that, right? Especially at the age you were at, where it was kind of a transitional point to being a grown-up.
You do, yeah. I mean, fortunately, I was young when I took over the management and then ultimately the lead position. I was in my mid-20s, so if I was perhaps later in life with a family and more mouths to feed, so to speak, or more responsibility, it may have impacted things. I may not have had the freedom. At that point, I was largely just caring, of course, for our company, but caring for myself financially. So it was I was more free to take those risks, and I can see how that could be a difficulty with someone who doesn't have that, or is just at a different point in life, is the best way to say it.
Yeah, and it makes sense. And now things are a lot smoother now that you're doing more sales and more efficiency on each of the brokers out there making deals. So it's easier to feed them more mouths, or at least be confident that you're going to be able to,
much more stability.
Yeah.
Much more stability. But, I also try to keep the pressure on myself. We opened the second office last year. We've got additional expansion plans. I'm not the type that complacency isn't for me, although it's something to be guarded against. You do have to be careful when you find a little bit of success. It is easy to slow down and get comfortable.
Yeah, no kidding. And that is poison.
Right.
That'll kill you.
Right.
When you say expanding and all that, what do you, not giving out secrets, but what does it mean in this business? Is it just bodies on the street, or what's changing in real estate that you can adapt to or you can use as an advantage versus all the realtor.com folks or Century 21 or anybody else? Like what is there a benefit to being the small firm underneath the umbrella and all, but to being
there's maneuverability. And that what I touched upon earlier was an element of accountability. I think that there, can be scaling issues as companies grow. And I speak with owners of 200 and 300 and 400 agent companies, multiple offices, and there is a correct way to do that where you can maintain the necessary oversight. More importantly, provide the right support for the agent base, and that's got to be done, frankly, with good managers. So I got a little bit lost on
that. Doesn't matter. Is that of interest to you? Is building as big a firm as possible, or is it more about kind of where you have it now, where it's a niche, small family-based business? And I don't mean small in any derogatory. I mean small in the sense that you can see, the ends of the kingdom, you can manage it. Is that, when you say growth, what do you want? Do you want to be the 400-person office, or do you want to just grow using efficiency and maintaining sort of a small business stature?
I would like to...
No wrong answer.
No.
I'm just curious.
No, that's perfectly fine. It's a great question. I like the opportunity to answer this. I'd like to grow in the managed way that I'm talking about. I would like to increase geographically. Currently, we're operating throughout most of Massachusetts. We don't go too far west, but we also are licensed and increasing our productivity in Connecticut, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire. So expanding geography, expanding agent count is, of course, a necessity of that, but doing it correctly. We will not hire agents just to hire agents. We are not necessarily completely tuned into the scoreboard of how many houses that we sell. Growing and I mean, why I do this is to help agents grow their business. There's nothing more gratifying to me than when we can bring an agent from a low production or a starting point up to a high producing agent and provide a fantastic experience for our clients.
It sounds like you want to grow, but grow through purpose and efficiency, as opposed to trying to just grow metrics, like trying to just create counts.
I would say that's definitely an accurate assessment.
No, when you expand and you go into Rhode Island and Connecticut, does that involve a lot more time in the car for you in the beginning of the expansion, or is it one of those kind of, you hire people that are local to the area? And I guess what I'm driving at, the real question to answer is, how do you feel? This market, right? You start from the Worcester market, and right. Massachusetts is roughly an extension of Worcester. But as things branch out into different states and you don't know it like you know it here, how do you feel comfortable in the things are going to be run, the Barbera way, that it's going to be a good representation of your business as it goes out there? How do you plan for that?
It all starts with selecting the right talent, and real estate is, of course, local. The processes and the marketing, there are some things that are applicable to geographies that are more broad than an individual town. But, we have to make sure that we're hiring agents that are comfortable, competent, more than competent, that excel in a specific geography that they're going to work in.
Yeah.
So that starts with that. It starts with hiring the right talent that does have the local knowledge.
And what was it like when you were working for your dad, having Thanksgiving and things, and you were both work together, but you also were family together? Did work and family life, I mean, obviously they coexist. Did they ever clash? Was there ever anything of tough times there where you're the young guy cutting his teeth and dad was the head honcho?
Yeah, not really, because of the structure of the company. When I was an agent, I was an independent contractor, just like any other agent. There was only a really brief period of time where we were both in the management capacity, and frankly, that didn't work well. Just because there are some difficulties.
Realities.
Yeah, and I was having a conversation with a broker that I hired recently who is involved in a family-run real estate brokerage in the south of the United States, and we were talking about it just this morning. We were together, and we were sort of recounting experiences, and he had brothers that he was involved in business with as well, and it's there's a lot of emotion loaded with family, and
it comes along for the ride. I mean, it's part of the package,
without question. But to answer your question, it never really had a negative impact. But I think we both recognized pretty quickly that just the element of redundancy and having two people in the same position essentially. But B, there's some difficulty there. I understand that some, there are many companies that are multi-generational and run fine there, but I can certainly attest to some challenges involved in that too.
Well, yeah, they're always going to be. Like, my father works with me, and it's a great relationship, as close to perfect as you could have it. But there's days we grind each other's gears. There's days that you get on each other's nerves, and you can get on your father or your son's nerves more than you can Jerry down the hall, because Jerry is an employee. But that's what Jerry is, as opposed to dad is dad and either an employee or a boss or whatever. So there's a certain level of reality of the fabric that comes with that relationship. You can't pretend it's not there. I see it, and it's funny because I've been through it. You go through it, and I know some other folks who have family businesses, and you can always watch the dynamic as the people try to figure out, even if it's been years, how to have the relationship, right? Do I call dad? Do I call dad by his name when I'm at work, which I always find is weird. But I mean, to each their own, nothing against it. But when I know you're talking about your dad and you're calling him by his name, I'm like, are we talking about your dad still? Because I'm getting a little confused. But that stuff's, it sounds so petty and so little, but that's real. And if that's on your mind when you're having the conversations, then clearly it's part of the fabric of the company, right? It's a reality that's there. So I always find it interesting how different people deal with it differently. What's it like now that you're the boss of the company that he started and he's out of it? Does he, ask you how's business and what's new, or does he basically he hung his hat and he's not that interested anymore?
Yeah, we discuss in general terms, and then we still have some connection through the property management company too. I don't have a day-to-day operation or function there, I should say, but there was a point, maybe I think it was about 5 years ago, my father actually was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer.
Oh my, I didn't know that.
And he's head off the typical presumption. He's in fantastic health. He's been one of the very, very fortunate people who's been cancer-free since.
That's amazing. That's awesome.
It a testament to his will and strength and
to the doctors and to everybody in that party. That's awful, but I mean,
without
you
question.
Can't get a better story.
Without, it was that was of course a trying time for all the normal reasons that it would be a trying time in the family. But at that time he had the property management company and it was a very lean company. It was frankly him, and then he subcontracted for a lot of the maintenance functions, and he was down and out. He of course couldn't work. So at that time I found myself now running two companies that I hadn't planned or anticipated doing. So I became very involved in that and reorganized a lot of the things in a complete vacuum. Where he had bigger things to fight.
He doesn't need to know about the Monday morning status. Exactly. So it's not on the radar.
Exactly. So we were successful in getting that to a place where it is now, and so I still have some involvement in that because of
legacy
and frankly just having to step up and do it. And that was an interesting one.
Well, that is interesting. Let's talk more about that. I mean, because having to step up, and I imagine that because you own the business here and the way that you operate it, where you don't have to be here 9 to 5, that was enabling. It might have been harder to step up if you were punching a clock and you were in somewhere else, working for someone else 9 to 5. It might have been harder to step up and help your dad out. In which case, then he's going to suffer even greater, right? Because at that point he can't do anything with the business. No, that's one of the saddest stories when people do get sick is they have no resources.
Yeah. If I had worked a 9 to 5 job, if that was if I had I hate to say
regular
job. There's no way that I would have been able to do both, and they're somewhat complementary, but really autonomous businesses. There's no overlap between the two.
Well, they're the same in that they involve places people live. But it's not the same business. One is selling them, and one is managing the use of them. So
that's vastly different.
That had to be a big period of growth for you and probably for your dad too, especially now that his health came back. I mean, he's got to view things differently, the world. I mean, just everything, because when you get that news, you think it's going one way, and for him it didn't. That's awesome.
Yeah, the curious part about it is that I don't think he ever was thinking that it was going to go that way.
It's kind of like you with the market crashing.
Yeah, it's almost a willful naivety or ignorance. I honestly think, and I think that was a major component. And my father is not the most technologically advanced or technologically interested person, I should say. So he wasn't one to Google the statistics. My sister, my mother, and I, we all knew that we were looking at a 5% survival rate.
Yeah.
He had no idea. After the surgery was complete and he was declared cancer-free, the doctor mentioned it, and he was flabbergasted.
Wow.
I don't think that he was aware or wanted to be made aware. He viewed it as a temporary inconvenience.
Jesus,
to be dealt with later.
I'm really glad it worked out the way that it did. But so when I asked you 20 minutes ago about how the business affects you, at home and in your personal life, this is what I'm talking about. When something like this happens and you have to step up and you have to run this other business, this one's still got to keep going, right?
Sure.
And then your personal life, we're talking about your dad, not just like a natural disaster that you're stepping up to help for. So then you've got to be scared out of your mind. Emotions going crazy. I don't even know where to begin with, like, what's going through your head? Just, is it trying to, at that point, like when you're running the two of them and you're scared about your dad, what's it like? Are you trying to figure out what the end is? You're trying to figure out what the businesses should do? Or is it a wake up and try to get through this day to start again tomorrow? It's got to feel like you're in the middle of a tornado, right?
Yeah. There was an element of kind of an involuntary adaptation where it was just, this is what my work day is now. And we were fortunate in that I was able to grow, both companies actually grew during that time too. It wasn't as though the necessary work at the property management company took away from what we're doing with the brokerage. The brokerage actually had some of its best growth years during that time. I don't, if you ask me to recount exactly how it all went down, I probably couldn't tell you.
Yeah, I bet.
Probably some element of compartmentalization, and you just do. When you're put in those sorts of situations and your family's comfort and livelihood and everything is at stake, you just do.
Do you think that taking on the other company and basically doubling your, I don't know if it's double, but having a lot more workload, do you think it was helpful in getting through it? Because you kind of, to some degree, had to put your head down and grind, and that kind of took you out of the fear. I'm just guessing. I don't know.
Everything's easy once you've already done it. And that's a way that I look at it, right? It's, I probably wouldn't have volunteered myself to be under that level of strain. It was tough. It was tough. It was all encompassing. And that, I'm speaking strictly about the business component of it being tough. And then you add that with the emotional component. And I'm fortunate in that our family is extremely strong. My sister, my mother, my wife, Caitlin, were all by my side at that time. Taking care of, a lot of the things outside of the business.
Picking up slack.
Just as important. Those, I couldn't have done the business components without having the support on the other end of it. So I put it all into one big ball, and that's this, what needed to be done was done.
Well, when you own the business, it's all related. You can't, there's only a degree to which you can separate the business from home life, from marriage and sisters and brothers and grandparents, and it's all related because it's part of what you do. It's part of your life. Well, I guess that there's no blanket answer, so it's not the same for everybody. But most people I talk to that own a business, they are in it, and consumes is the wrong word, but it's the fire that keeps them going. There's something about it that they love, and so it's connected deeper than a lot of folks who don't like their jobs. Which is an unfortunate reality for a lot of people. They don't like what they do. They hate their job, but they just do it because they need to, or they don't want to go figure something else out. And I think that those people take stuff home too, but it's a different relationship, because when you own the place, if you're taking home hate and stress and everything every night, then shame on you. You own the place, change it, right? But it doesn't mean you're not going to take home stress. You're not going to take home anxiety once in a while, but you're also taking home pride. You're taking home just the desire to do more. It's a lot easier to crack the laptop at 8 after you put the kids to bed and work on something that you care about than work on something that your boss is expecting in the morning. There's a big difference.
Absolutely. And I know we touched a little bit on work-life balance, and there's a lot that you can improve there too. And I think earlier in my career, I was really bad at separating the two.
You and me both.
Yeah, and it's not an uncommon thing amongst business owners. I know that it's very common. And when I say business owners, I mean our real estate agents are business owners too. So everybody who works under this umbrella.
I agree. That's the purpose of this show.
Exactly.
I don't care if it's a one-man show to a Fortune 500 company. I just like talking to people who have done it and getting a perspective on what it took to make a business. Doesn't matter what the business is.
Right. And that's one of the things that I try to help our agents with is how to draw that line. Like personally, I don't really work at home. when I go home at the end of the day, I'll always take calls from agents if they need support. After hours, of course, that happens from time to time. But barring that, if I need to make more than a phone call, I'll drive to the office, and I'll do that because this is my workplace and that's my home place. And it took me quite a while to learn that as an adaptation. And it's not the same for everyone. I know a lot of people that are very successful, whether it's a corner of the basement that's deemed the home office or whatever. But for a long period of time, I just mixed the two all of the time, and it made it very difficult to disconnect when the disconnection was necessary, and at times it is.
Yeah, it is. But your point, I think, is a good one, that there's no right or wrong. It's how it works for you. And you have to figure out how to make it work for you, because it's a different answer for everybody. And there's no do this and it works. For some people, it's don't bring it home. For some people, they bring it home. For some people, it's a blend. For some people, they have the corner in the basement where they can go dedicate and then they can walk away. And for some people, it's just woven into their life. It's an ebb and a flow. It just depends. I think that's one of the biggest things, the biggest takeaways, especially of all these conversations that I get to have with people that own businesses, is none of them are the same. Right. There's a huge amount of difference in what makes it work, how much struggle it took, how much struggle is yet to come. I already talked to one guy that's already done. He built a business, sold a business. He had the American dream, which was really fun to talk about because, of course, on paper he's got the American dream, but then there's all the reality for the 20 or 30 years that he owned the business. That was really great conversation because there was a lot more to it than build business, sell business. You know what I mean?
Sure. And you're right. There are so many different paths that you can take. And, you talked about finding what works. And to me, you find out what works by a process of elimination, frankly, by first finding out what doesn't work.
Yeah, usually I screw up first.
Those are the stronger signals, right?
Yeah. And what works also changes. Sure. Like I've had my business for 20 years now, and what worked 20 years ago was not what was working or not working 10 years ago, which is not what's working or not working now. It's always changing, and it changes by the state of life that you're in. When I started the business, I was in college basically, and then eventually, I get married and have kids, and those are very different phases, very different priorities. And then not to mention, I'm a lot older than I was then. I have a different wants out of life, and it's nice. I think part of what I love is the freedom to adapt. What's always really made me love having my own business, and I've always had the one, and then I've had a bunch of others along the way. And what keeps me interested is classic ADD, and I can't just do the same thing all the time, or I go out of my mind. I'm not strong enough for that. But I like the freedom to change what I do. In other words, like my same company is the same company that it was 20 years ago, but we do totally different things. It's like it's a different place. I just operate under the umbrella that it's in the same space, but it's totally different. And it gets, reborn as technologies come about, or life changes, or adapting to being a dad with 2 kids who's going to be at all the practices. And because that's what's important to me. So I shape my life around the time. I view time as part of a big part of my compensation from the business is the fact that I can do what I want when I want, to a degree. The clients are always the boss, but to a degree, I'm the guy that's always at practice, the guy that's always on the slopes with the kids, the guy that's doing stuff with them. And I wouldn't trade that for the world. I wouldn't trade that for anything, because to me, that's my number one goal. Is like that's my first job as dad, and this business allows me to do that. Where if I had a typical 9 to 5, I'm not that experienced with 9 to 5s, but I did have some of them before this. Even one after college where I was still doing this, but this was like a part-time thing at the time. It was right after college. And I just couldn't adapt to it. I couldn't adapt to the captivity, I guess is the way to put it. And it killed me. But so do you see that with the company here? Like it's a different animal than it was before you were married and wanting to go home at 5 o'clock, or because like you mentioned, you were younger. Sure. And more of a bulldozer, and not worrying about work-life balance. So what changes here?
Yeah, there's definitely more adaptability when you can control your function. We try to control the total number of hours that we put into it, but even if I can change when those hours are, what days they fall on and things, then it does allow for more flexibility with family, and that part's important. And I love the way that you just sort of described that. It's, what's your wealth? Your wealth changes, right? When you're
100%.
25, 30, it was all about the Ferrari or whatever.
Yep.
Now going to the kids' soccer practice or being on the ski slopes or that's your wealth. And it's just this sort of age-old premise of trading time for money.
Yep.
And I think
that's ultimately what we're all doing, trading time for money.
That's all it comes down to. And then eventually you're trading money for time, trying to buy back your time. And at the ripe old age of 35, I'm assigning more importance to the time factor. And
it's about when it starts, I think.
Yeah. It's, obviously there's family changes in family and things that impact it. But it's important to recognize that, and that is one of the primary benefits. And it's not to say that if you're a business owner, you'll have, you can just cancel work on Wednesday if you don't want to go to work Wednesday because you've got some family obligation you want to do.
It's not about just not working. Yeah. But it's about adaptability at work.
Exactly, in totality, and it may be trading compensation for that time. But you've got that option. You're able to kind of set your rules to some extent, but know that the outcome is going to be dependent ultimately about the quality and the amount of output work that you put into it.
And what about you? Do you have other aspirations? Do you want to do other things, or is that not even on the radar yet? You're head down in this and growing efficiency and keeping this business growing and growing.
Within the business world or within the world?
General.
Okay. In the business, that's one trap that I think I may have fallen into at some point earlier in my career was I wanted to do 5 different things. At this point, I really am trying to stay narrow and deep in the real estate brokerage business. This is what I've accumulated most of my experience in, and I think that I can have the most impact in staying focused on this. There are offshoots. There's, of course, the property management component. There's the development world. A lot of things that have to do with real estate, but the majority of my time is focused on making sure that this business grows in the measured way that we had talked about.
That's good. So lights your fire to get interested in doing it.
Right. And
that's
it's
important.
Fun. And we talk about transformative. I mean, my client is different now than it was 3 years ago. My client is now the agent and helping that agent grow.
Yeah. That's got to be a difference.
Yeah.
So, because a lot of what, when we're talking about time and getting your time taken up, a lot of what probably takes up a real estate agent's time, I would imagine, is a lot of phone calls. And probably there's a lot of research and a lot of phone calls because everybody that you're representing calls you whenever they want, right?
Right.
And you have to kind of be available or else someone else will be.
Yeah. I
mean, that's got to be a pressure.
And there's there are 2 components to what defines a successful real estate agent, and it's the balance of skill and service. And service oftentimes is quantified by your ability to get back to the client very, very quickly, and that's essentially important. We're dealing with a very emotionally loaded transaction.
Yeah.
Us outside of the medical field, there aren't too many other things that people are involved in that they assign this level of emotion to, particularly in the residential world where, the family home is just loaded. And so oftentimes we're dealing with, situations that may arise from, a divorce or a death, and that can be part of it. Or it could be all on the positive side, the first-time home buyer's first home. But the point that I'm making with it is it's an emotionally loaded time. And because of that, when somebody needs to talk, sometimes they need to talk. They need to talk immediately. And you're not going to get your attorney on the phone at 9:30 p.m.
Nope.
In most cases.
Well, yeah, it depends who you are, but we're not.
Exactly. Being available is very, very important. So that falls under the service realm. And then
that falls under work-life balance too, though, because when people are buying a home, they probably work, which means they want to talk about the house nights and weekends.
There's an inverse relationship, of course, yeah. So great time to talk about this. We're going into a week next week where we've got the Christmas holiday in the middle of the week, and the following week we've got January 1st. So we've got 2 quasi-holiday weeks.
Yeah.
And particularly, independent professionals or independent contractors, they're setting their own hours. There's not a real specific, I don't know which days next week every attorney is going to be in the office or not in the office. But the client knows that they can call us with few exceptions and just about any time.
Do you, so on that work-life balance and the, starting to try to figure out how to manage your time, do you think that is a difference? I want to go back to talking about the difference with Barbera. And you said one of it is the management of people and coaching. You coaching help people. So is that something that's different, you think, that you do that maybe the bigger firms, the more transactional firms don't do is coaching agents on how to set their own boundaries and have a personal life so that they can maintain that sort of happiness with taking phone calls when they do. You alluded to it. You talked about coaching people about, going home and having it be home and that sort of stuff, even if they work from home, maybe a different space. Is that you mentioned that you do that. Is that something that you think is important, and does that fall under the Barbera difference, so to speak? Is that one of those things that you think you do differently? And what is it like in a normal office?
It's extremely important, and in setting boundaries is the terminology that you used, and there's definitely a component of that. But in order for agents to perform at a high level and be sustainable, for that practice to be sustainable, they have to be able to draw boundaries and set work hours and non-work hours. And I know that it may sound a little confusing with my previous statement about being available, and it's that balance that you have to find.
Well, it is confusing.
Yeah.
It's going to be confusing. That's one of those fun parts, right?
Sure. And it is finding, each agent is going to find their own balance. And I've got agents that like to start their work day very early, and agents that tend to work later into the evening and everything in between. So finding that balance and then clearly communicating that to the client so that those boundaries are understood and that the client has a good expectation of when you're available to be reached it's extremely important. It really is.
Ultimately, it's for you. You're concerned with them being high performers, right? Which means having a healthy relationship to the job, because if you get burned out, then you're not going to be any good to themselves or to you. So it's part of encouraging the work-life balance to end up getting more out of the people? Because I don't know, for me as a business owner, outcome is all that matters.
Right.
I don't care how early you get here or how late you stay. I only care that you do a good job and you do it well, and I don't have to grind you to get the good job.
Yep.
But I think that's different than the way things used to be. I think, well, in a lot of ways it still is in corporate America. A lot of your job is presence. And it's showing up early and it's staying late. And I think that's changing a lot, especially with people being able to telecommute. That's changing in general industries. But I still think there's a huge component of being seen. And I don't find value in that.
Right. It's ingrained in our culture, and I think it comes from a good place, right? I used to tout
a hard-working place.
Exactly. I used to tout the fact how many hours I worked in a week, and now I look back at that and I say, how many of those hours were things that I needed to be doing,
right?
Or when I found ways to make my time more efficient. So now you're absolutely right that outcome is what is essential. I mean, my saying for it is above all be effective. Right?
Yeah.
What's the effect of your work? And the way that we measure outcome, the way that I measure outcome from the company standpoint, is client experience. It's not of tremendous import to me whether an agent closes 20 deals or 10 deals. If I have at the end of the year, if that agent that closed 10 deals has 10 thrilled clients that appreciated the experience and were able to meet their goals and have a good experience through it, that's much more important to me than an agent who closes 20, 30, or 50 deals where half of them are happy and half of them aren't. Client experience is 110% of it.
Well, I imagine a lot of your business comes from people that have had a good experience, and then either they call you again when it comes time to buy or sell, or they tell their friends and their friends give you a call, right? I mean, that's still got to be the primary driver for your industry.
80%. So for our top performing agents, it's 80% repeat and referral business, and that's what we all strive toward. That is how we build our prospecting training programs too. Of course, our agents have to introduce themselves to new buyers. You have to have, in order to have repeat clients, you have to have clients. So of course there is a component of reaching new clientele, but we are a service-oriented company. That's deeply ingrained in our ethos, and that's one thing that we reinforce over and over again, is that you've got to provide excellent service coupled with excellent skill. The skill component is something that sometimes is overlooked. In the absence of skill, sometimes service masks that, but we also want to assure that our agents are spending sufficient time, and I give them opportunity to increase their skills. Because like we had talked about at the beginning, there are a lot of real estate agents out there that are doing 1, 2, 3 transactions a year. They're doing it as a hobby. Nothing against those people. Some of them can do a very fine job of it, but the vast majority.
Right, but a dentist that does 3 fillings a year, do you want to go there for your next filling?
Exactly. It's the analogy I usually use, a surgeon, but right along the same lines. If my knee is hurt, I want to go to the surgeon that did 30 knee surgeries last year, not the one who, I don't want the best brain surgeon. I want the most busy knee surgeon, the specialist, the person who knows what to look out for, how to avoid things, how to deal with things when they do go wrong in the process. That's what's vitally important.
Yeah, it is. That is what it comes down to.
Sure.
What else? I know what I wanted to ask you. After you took over the business, so you go from outside to inside, even though it's pretty transparent because it was your dad, but is there anything that struck you or caught you off guard for running the business that you didn't expect or you didn't see going into it? Like, let's say once you take over, you start the relationship with Real Living, and so it's kind of new from the way your father's business was run, right? And
Sure.
you're on this new path. Was there any aha moments or things that caught you, like lessons that you think back on, things you didn't see?
Math.
That sucks.
It's just, I didn't understand the importance of understanding the numbers and really, diving into the numbers and monitoring them frequently and closely. That was probably the most biggest epiphany I had. And it sounds almost silly saying it now, but constant monitoring of what your status markers and where you are is
health.
Yeah, and doing it proactively and not retroactively. That was a lesson that even came later. Once I understood that, okay, we've got to watch this part of it, but now being able to make adjustments prior to running into things that you couldn't ignore, I guess.
Yeah. So last thing I want to ask about is, as far as growth, right, and growth issues, what is in the way of growing? You said it's hiring the right people and it's bodies. But as an industry, I want to look more like macro level. What's in the way of growing? Is it the market and just so many houses to sell, or is that still getting better and better now? And like, what is it?
The market is not stifling anything. It's I hate to use just the word technology, but the brokerage model is changing drastically.
That's what I want to hear about, because it's totally outside of my realm of understanding.
Sure. So, it's probably symptomatic of the broader problem of too many agents with not enough training. But the reality is that there's major compression of commission. So there's the public sentiment undervalues real estate agents. And I don't blame the public for undervaluing real estate agents, because if you average out the skill level of all real estate agents, then the
bar's low.
I would say that we are overvalued without question. However, when you isolate the top professionals from the professionals who have not invested the time or just haven't had the right guidance, then those top professionals, I think, are an absolute bargain. I think that if the
for sure
the top agents,
and that goes across different industries too, especially service related.
It does,
industries.
but if you look at compare us to attorneys who bill by the hour, but if you go to a $100 an hour attorney, if that exists, and a $700 an hour attorney, you're going to have a major and recognizable difference. With real estate agents, by and large, the same amount is charged with a little bit of variation, and you could be getting someone who is brand new, just out of class, hasn't even been through a transaction, or someone who is the best real estate.
1,000 transactions under their belt.
It's unreal. I mean, the variation and the skill level that you could be exposed to at the same cost is somewhat unique to the industry. So to extrapolate that, there are entire brokerages and companies that are emerging at this point that are just trying to compress the commission. They're trying to be the cheapest player, and they're not hiring the best talent. They're not training and supporting the best talent. They can't. The math does not make sense. So, like I said at the beginning, we've sort of got a PR problem in this industry where, the consumer feels that they should pay less, but they don't recognize the variation, the different levels of service they can get with competing real estate agents. And
so it's sort of a consumer education challenge.
It is, and it's a hard lesson to demonstrate. How do you properly put forth the value that you bring to the table, and realize that saving a half a point or a point on commission could very well cost you 5, 10, 15, 20 points on the percentage of the sale price of your home, or even worse, wind up in a lawsuit. It's a difficult proposition to explain correctly.
I would say you got to take the commission thing out of it. I mean, like you said, there's a very small difference if you're changing a point or a half a point as opposed to a $100 versus $700 attorney.
Right.
The difference in the consumer education, it seems like a challenge when I'm looking at you from the outside, is what you really need to do is have that person understand what you bring to the table versus what someone who might be fresh out of school or doesn't really put it's a part-time gig, or they've only sold a couple of houses, what the difference in that experience is going to be. But you have to do that education before you know the person.
It's a big message to get out prior to having the conversation. If I never get the opportunity to sit across the table from you and explain what it is that we do and why it's different, it's really difficult to put that into a marketing piece.
Yeah, how do you do that? Because I've never seen that from any real estate firm.
That's why repeat and referral business is such a key element. When I can only get so many words out to you in whatever media possible before you make your decision. However, if I come highly recommended from a friend or a family member or someone who's actually completed a transaction with one of our agents, then that sentiment is so much more reinforced, I guess is the best way to say it.
I can see that for sure. But like with most industries, I don't know if it's going to be affected by technology as much, yours, where there's been a lot of platforms around in real estate, but mostly around rental and, like Airbnbs and that sort of thing. But I'm sure someone's going to be trying to figure out how to replace the humans with a virtual transaction to buy houses.
That's in play right now.
It's in play, but it's not like sweeping the market yet.
Right. So Purple Bricks is one of the largest iBuyer programs. A lot of discussion, of course, about Zillow, who's gained tremendous market share and is now licensing and has been licensing themselves in states, and essentially that's the big question, right? This is a discussion that I have with my agents frequently: is are we replaceable?
Right.
And if we think that we're replaceable, then we are.
Right.
If we don't recognize the value, if we think that an algorithm can replace the skill component of what a real estate agent brings to the table, then you probably should step out of the business if you don't feel firmly that we bring something of tremendous value.
Right. And then if you're willing to figure out how to communicate that, because there's no question that some will be replaced with technology.
Without question.
Like in virtually any industry.
Sure.
But that doesn't mean all, like in virtually any industry. And the top performers and the people that can make a differentiator, there's still going to be people who want to walk through a new home with someone who can show them the ins and the outs and help them understand the inspection. And, there's value in the job that you do. But how do you explain that to people who don't already know? I'm just talking here, but to me, that's your challenge, especially as it gets harder and harder to be an agent or to differentiate yourselves, is before you've ever sat at the table and talked to them about it, is how do you figure out how to get that education out?
Sure. And consumers have, this has been replicated in other industries before. And a couple of analogies that I use are WebMD. When WebMD first came out, was there a serious thought that doctors would be replaced? No. I mean, if you've got a sniffle, if you've got a small problem, you might look on WebMD, get information.
Find out you're dying.
Exactly. Well, yeah, but exactly right. That is indicative of how cheap data is,
right?
Versus skill. But so if you've got the sniffle, you may rely on WebMD. If you find a lump somewhere that you think is somewhere, you're calling your doctor. You don't care what the doctor costs. You're going to hire the best doctor you can find because it's that important. Same thing with a legal issue. If you need to draft a will, maybe you go to LegalZoom and get the will. If you're in handcuffs or get served with a lawsuit or something along those lines.
You're not going to LegalZoom.
No, you're going to go to the best attorney that you can find. So the point is, like you touched upon it and you explained it well, at the top level of performance, it may actually get easier as technology replaces the hobbyist agent, the agent that has not dedicated the time and energy to become very, very good at the business. As those ones are purged, then it may be easier, and perhaps our PR problem will be reduced.
Well, I think it'll probably get easier for those who are prepared for it, for those who are ready to communicate the value and be the difference. You know what I mean? Like higher ed has been majorly disrupted in a similar fashion, where it's predicted like half of all colleges will be closed in like 10 years because of online education and the newer trend where everyone doesn't have to go to college, which there's a lot of merit to that. There's perfect sense to that, where they were kind of gliding along for a long time, the colleges, because everyone could get the money easily, get into the college, and there was this societal thing where you had to go regardless of what you're going to do, and that's kind of waning. Anyway, I digress. Point is, the schools that communicate their value Harvard's not going anywhere. They're not going to be part of the schools that close.
Right.
But a lot of the other schools that are just selling classes are going to go by the wayside. And that's probably a parallel with you. The realtors who are just selling houses will probably fall prey to purple bricks. I don't even know what that is, but that or the next iteration or Zillow. But then the agents who can find a way to communicate, and maybe it's like a teaming up with other realtors and just having I think they've tried it like with some of the bigger firms, but they were too cheesy or too like commercialized. But having messaging that goes out that basically is educating on the why, like what does it mean to have you in the corner with this big transaction where you're going to live with your family and all of that, as opposed to trying to shave off half a point and having an algorithm find you the right house.
Right, like you said, it boils down to value. You've got to actually provide something of value, and the housing or real estate transaction is a transaction that's complicated enough that just hiring someone who does them day in and day out, hiring the surgeon that does 30 knee surgeries, the ability for them to foresee potential issues and evade potential issues that have massive implications, that's the crux of the value. That's a skill category. It's not just a service category, and it's not just data.
Mm-hmm.
If we want to bring this back maybe 20, 25, actually probably closer to 30 years ago now, 25 I think, the way that consumers were made aware of property that was for sale was in these bound books that were dropped at real estate companies' front doors every 2 to 4 weeks. So if you wanted to find out what was for sale, you had to go to the real estate agent because they controlled the data. We lost control of that data. We gave control of that data away many years ago through the internet, through what we call IDs.
There's no way you were keeping control of that data.
And we shouldn't. That should not be a value proposition. As long as our value proposition is control of data, we don't have value.
Right.
So that toothpaste is out of the tube, right? That's never going to go back. So there was a transition. A lot of agents that would fault, this is, I guess, Zillow was probably the biggest, the most effective and fastest growing version of this data giver. But now that part is done, we've got to not focus on data. So it's not about having the information. It's not about just being the one to pick up your phone. At this point, if you're going to survive in this business, if you're not if you're going to survive, if you're going to thrive in this business, you've got to develop skills. Just like the best litigation attorneys have skills, just like the best physicians have skills, that's where real estate agents need to focus. And I still think that insulates us from any technological advancement. If you really want to extrapolate out and try to predict what artificial intelligence, where AI will be in 5, 10, or 15 years, does that eventually?
Like those Boston Dynamic dogs start selling houses, you can't compete with those. They can open doors now.
That would be the only, if we're going to have that conversation about the ability for AI to replace, at what point does AI replace physicians? At what point is AI better at surgery?
Well, they probably will be.
Yeah.
For certain types of surgery. But like you said, though, of course, we're so limited, and you and I are probably, I don't know how, maybe you are. I'm not qualified to talk about AI. I'm not smart enough to talk about what's going to be happening with artificial intelligence. But I think even a dummy like me can see that they will for sure be better at surgeries than surgeons.
Right.
On one side of the coin, because they won't have a hand that might tremble. They won't have any of the inherent flaws of a human. Mm-hmm. But and this is where I could be wrong, but I struggle to see where when shit goes wrong, that human surgeon is going to be able to adapt to whatever goes wrong, where AI, this is where my understanding might be lacking, but AI is going to be limited to what it can understand, not processing in real time.
Right.
Supposedly it'd be able to process in real time and better, but I just don't know that I believe that. I don't know that it's going to be able to react to something going wrong or finding, it would know that when you're doing this surgery, sometimes you accidentally cut this vein and you have to close it up. But it wouldn't know about when the fluorescent light in the ceiling breaks during a surgery and a piece of glass falls down on the person. What do you do now? That's where I want the human surgeon.
Yeah, it's not programmed for that, right? And again, I've got a probably equal level of knowledge regarding AI, and it's pretty much restricted to what I've heard on interesting podcasts.
Yeah,
but and I mean, I kind of using this sort of drama to make a point that the prospect of being replaced completely by technology. I think it is a viable and a should be a fear of those that haven't developed skills. But if you're allocating the right amount of energy and resources to doing this business, or any business, frankly, it'll be transformed. It'll continue to be transformed. It has been significantly over the past 10 or 15 years, but I think there's always still a space for good skilled real estate agents.
What are some of the skills that you're looking for for a real estate agent to be able to work here? What are the skills when you're differentiating?
Sure. So, I mean, maximizing upside, of course, when you're representing the seller of a home, the most important thing to do is to figure out what the seller's motivations are, because it's not always just a matter of price point, but listening to the client, figuring out what the client's primary motivators are. Sometimes it's speed of a sale. Oftentimes it's maximizing the achievable sale price. These are two major components that require a level of transactional experience. Marketing, of course, is a tremendously important part of the skill, primarily on the seller side. Those are the three that I would really characterize.
And people skills, right? I mean, the fact that
emotional intelligence.
Holding a conversation and taking it forward in a way that you can have a beneficial relationship's got to be huge.
Right. People skills are paramount in
everyone
any
doesn't have
service
them.
industry. No, a lot of people don't, and they, like every other skill, can be learned and grown. When I think of the eclectic mix of people we've got here, I've got agents from 25 to 73 years old, and from every different cultural background and education, dramatically different, from Ivy League graduates to those without college educations, and they've all developed these emotional skills and people skills, and they're constantly trying to improve all these different things. It varies wildly.
It's kind of fun though, right? It's kind of fun to watch it and figure out how it's all going to work, and then look back in 5 years and think how wrong you were, but you adapted and figured out how to actually stitch it all together along the way.
That's why I love memorializing these things in podcasts, so that I can look back at this in 3 years from now and say, you know what?
Right.
I hit the nail on the head on that one, and that one not so much.
I was way off on that one.
It's it is funny when I look back at how I thought about things over the 15 years in this business, 15 plus years in this business. How much has changed, but the core principles kind of remain the same.
Well, I think, yes, 100%. But I think also the maturity level of the person looking back changes. At least that's one of my biggest lessons is when I was wrong when I was younger, I was embarrassed to be wrong. Now I just assume most of it's going to be wrong, and I want to see how I adapted to whatever I said that was wrong, because I obviously, I don't know what I'm talking about right now. I know way better than I did 5 years ago.
Right.
But why do I think in 5 years I wouldn't know way better than I do right now? I assume I'm going to, and it's just, always learning. But when you're a kid, when you're 20, when you're 23, I didn't think that you were still learning. I thought, all right, I did the learning, and now I do the working, and this, I just didn't get it. I was too young, but I think, like we started on in the earlier part of this discussion, sometimes being young is helpful. Being a young idiot, just because you can put your head down and just bulldoze through things, and you don't know enough to be hesitant sometimes, and that can pay off.
And that's
for you, having a real estate firm come up in the biggest collapse of the market.
And then, when I was joking around earlier, not joking around, when I was explaining earlier that my most important thing was learning my numbers. I mean, frankly speaking, in 2008, if I analyzed numbers and figures the way that I do now, I never would have continued the business. For several years, that could be said. That willful ignorance did give me the confidence or false confidence, whatever you want to call it, to push forward and actually get it to the point where it is today.
Yeah, I don't think it's a false confidence. I think just when you're younger, you weigh things differently because it's a different world that you're looking at. And, for every stage that you graduate to, you're looking through a different lens. And then when you look back at the decisions you were making then, you're like, what was I thinking? But of course you had different glasses on at the time. It was different.
And you had to make that decision to learn that it was the wrong decision.
Right.
Nobody's born innately with that knowledge. You just, you don't have it. You have to develop it through mistakes.
That's one of my favorite parts. And it always comes up. And I think it's almost cliche. Everyone says, yeah, you have to fail to learn, right? And failure's okay. But I don't think it's okay for most people. I think that it's like one of those you roll your eyes or you think, yeah, of course. But then people are still terrified of it, and they're not okay with it because our culture is really not a fail-safe culture. In America, it's more of a, ha-ha, you screwed up, and I think it's important, especially for people that own businesses or are planning to or want to. One of the biggest things to get comfortable with is you're going to be wrong more than you're right. And all you have to do is it's how you handle what's next after you figure out that it was a mistake or that it was incorrect, or what you do next, learning from the mistake and becoming smarter and making better choices. That is how you become successful, not by never making the wrong choice. I think that's an illusion.
I agree. I think there's some really general maps that you can follow, right? North, south, east, and west, but in the business world or the business, growing your business, there aren't, you don't take exit number 35 to get to where you're going.
No,
you're
definitely
going to wind
not.
up in the woods. You're going to wind up in a ditch. You're going to wind up in a bunch of ditches. And that's part of it. You've got to, one of the coaches that we work with, uses the saying, and I'm not certain if he came up with it, but I'm not sure who it's attributed to, but you can't sit in your driveway and wait for all the lights to turn green before you pull out. You got to get out there, and then you got to make adaptations and decisions all along the way, knowing, like you said, knowing that some of them are going to be wrong. Try to get the big ones right, but you won't even get all those right. But you just keep driving.
Yeah, you try to get as many right as you can.
Yeah.
But just realize that maybe that right is a result of 3 wrongs.
Exactly.
Eventually you might get it, but don't plan on getting everything the first time around, because you'll kill yourself if you're just beating yourself up over decisions that didn't work out.
Or you'll be stuck in the driveway.
Right.
Somebody else
never leave the driveway,
which
is where a lot of people get stuck. They get stuck never taking the first step because it's scary to take the first step and wonder, well, what if it doesn't go right? It's not going to. Take the first step so you can get that out of the way.
Exactly. If you recognize that, if you expect that there will be failures, not failure, but failures along the way, then it's liberating.
It really is. It's a good feeling, I think, when you can turn the corner in your own brain to no longer really be beating yourself up and get to, okay, well, now what?
Sure. Opens many, many doors. There's a lot of different directions you can go at that point.
And just like that, we're over an hour. So do you have anything else you want to talk about? I'm in no rush, but I don't want to keep you longer than I've requested of your time either.
No, I think we've touched upon some great points, and really appreciate you inviting me to join you here. It was a great conversation.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And just like that.